Hi folks, Nick here from 721 Challenge. Currently about to start my night shift out here in the Atlantic Ocean, rowing from Canary Islands through to Antigua.
Hello and welcome to a very special podcast episode.
Very special
of A Yorkshire Office.
special.
We have the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Nick Hollis in with us today, who has kindly donated some of his precious time to come and answer a few of our questions. So Nick, I don't think I'll do it justice. Please, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course I can, Chris. And firstly, really good to be here, really exciting. So I'm Nick Hollis. I'm, by trade, by profession, a mountain guide, mountain leader. But I'm also an adventurer and a very proud ambassador of ACS Group.
Fantastic, thank you. And I believe you have just finished one of your 721 challenge. Could you just first of all explain what the 721 challenge is?
Of course I can, Chris. So 721 Challenge is my contribution to the race against climate change, the problem that we're all confronting today. And the challenge itself involves climbing the 7 summits. So that is the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, which includes Everest. It includes skiing to both the North and the South Pole. And finally, rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. Hence the name 7 summits, 2 poles, 1 ocean.
That is a busy schedule you've got going.
And you've only got one left, haven't you?
That's correct, yeah. So I very recently stepped off my boat Kraken, having completed the Atlantic row. And in crikey, 2 weeks' time, I head off for the final expedition needed to complete 71 Challenge. And that is a ski journey to the geographical North Pole.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I've done something similar. I've walked to work in the snow before, so I'm sort of on a level playing field as Nick there. So I kind of get what he's about to go through. It's the kind of adventure you need your big coat for. Get big coat.
I'm amazed how little time there is in between each expedition. Like you only just finished the row and then straight off to doing another pole is...
Yeah, and that's one of the issues in terms of when you can do certain expeditions. So if we take, for example, Everest. Everest has a season, and the vast majority of mountaineers climbing Everest will set out in March time. So in fact, right now Everest is starting. The Sherpa community are in action, preparing everything. So Everest, you're limited. Exactly the same with the South Pole, which was the expedition I completed after Everest, and that needs to be done over our winter period, so effectively over the Christmas. And the reason for that is in Antarctica it's summertime, because if you were to try and attempt something like that during winter time, you would be in not just unbelievably brutal conditions, but also 24 hours of darkness. And the same then applies for the Atlantic row itself, which is the trip that I've just returned from. And again, the best period to cross Atlantic, certainly the route that I did, runs from the Christmas period also. And then finally into the North Pole. To ski to the North Pole is really interesting for a start. It hasn't been done, I think, for the last 5 years. I think 2018 was the last successful journey to the North Pole. But there's a very short window during summer where the conditions are suitable, and that's April. Hence why I'm heading off, and hence, yeah, it's not an ideal schedule, but very much dictated by the environment and the conditions.
Fantastic. So you've just mentioned, obviously, you've just finished your row. We did go out to a lot of our listeners, a lot of our staff here, the wider audience, to get some questions for yourself. So number one that we got, which was quite a popular question actually, what do you think about during the row? So you're out there for, was it 57 days you did it?
It was 50 days, 20 hours and change.
Oh, right. So I was a week over.
Wow.
But yeah,
you're underestimating Nick.
Because you did this solo. I know obviously there's a lot of teams out there who do it as a 5 group, 4, 3, 2, but you did it solo. So what kind of things are you thinking about whilst doing the row, knowing that you're going to be out there for quite a long time? Do you have sort of mind management plan? Do you schedule, I won't say like write down schedule what you're going to be thinking about, but do you sort of, how do you get into that mindset when you're out there of what to think about?
It's such a good question. And what was really interesting with the Atlantic row, I came in to the event, expecting there to be long periods of time where I'd have time to think. I'd downloaded a stack of audiobooks, for example, because I really like to learn on these expeditions where possible. But in reality, once the race started, there was so much going on. There was so much to do. There was very, very little what I consider free time for just general thought. So a lot of the time my mind was very, very active, but it was active with the here and now and dealing and problem solving with whatever it is I needed to do. So to give an example, in a typical day, I'm having to think about myself, my routine. How do I get the best out of my body within that 24-hour period? When am I going to row? When am I not going to row? I think about food a lot.
I think about food a lot as well.
Yeah, we all do. You can't help it.
I'm sat at my desk, I'm thinking about food.
Can't just pop to McDonald's out in the Atlantic though.
Bit different though, isn't it, guys?
Yeah, and it's so true. And on expeditions, food becomes incredibly important. So I'm thinking about food, not just in terms of, I need it for fuel to get across, but also for morale as well. And what am I going to look forward to eating? Okay, if I do this 2-hour shift on the oars, then it's worth it because I'm going to be able to eat this or that. And with the row, it's such a dynamic environment. There's always things happening. I'm thinking about the conditions, what's happening, what weather forecast have I received, what's the strategy that's coming to me from the ground team, how am I going to implement that? If it's in choppy waters, where the conditions I faced during my row, there was a lot of quite extreme conditions, high winds, big seas to contend with. And in those environments, it's so intense. You're in this state of absolute hyper focus, just ensuring that you're in a position to immediately respond to whatever it is you need to. And that could be a waves hit the side of the boat, so the boat's about to capsize. It could be the boat's come off course, and how do I get it back on course? Because if it remains off course and the waves smash over from the sides, again, it's much more likely to capsize. I had a lot of equipment failures, spending a lot of time thinking about how am I going to repair things, how am I going to solve problems. So there was always something to think about. But typically it tended to be practical things where I needed to think, as opposed to, I think, stepping away from expedition. We have a lot of time where our mind can wander, so to speak, sometimes into good places, sometimes into not so good places. But on the row, there was really not that much time. If you were to compare that with my last expedition prior to the row, which was 53 days completely on my own, crossing Antarctica from the edge of Antarctica through to the geographic South Pole, that was a completely different ballgame, where I was living in my own head 24 hours a day with nobody to talk to in this barren environment. It's just harsh, it's grey, it's totally devoid of life. And that was tough. That was really, really tough, managing the voice in the head, which can become very toxic, especially when you're struggling, when you're going through difficult times. And I found that a real issue. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why we do these things, particularly doing them solo, is you get to know yourself.
Just on the back of the food situation, what did you eat, Nick?
So I, planning the row, and as a solo rower, you would typically take longer than, say, you said at the start, a team of 2, a team of 3, a team of 4, 5, or whatever. So I took 85 days worth of food, and I was hoping my plan to make the crossing was somewhere between 55, 60 days. That was a target that I had in mind when going out and starting the row. So I wanted to be sure that I had reserve food, because of the weather conditions, if I had a problem on the boat, or whatever it is. And also looking back in history, some of the soloists can take well over 100 days to make the crossing.
Wow.
I then broke that food into 85 packs, and each pack I had a calorie target of 6,500 calories per day.
Wow.
And within that, taking advice from rowers that have gone before me, one of the advice was, don't eat too much in the way of freeze-dried meals. You're going to struggle to boil the water to make them, and secondly, you're going to struggle to consume them. And the recommendation I was given was have a lot of snacks, a lot of things that you could just grab and go. So for me, I would have only 2 freeze-dried meals. Take the South Pole, I probably ate about 7 of them a day. And then on top of that, I would have granola for breakfast, make myself a bit of a granola. I'd have lots of energy bars, but try and use wholesome, good quality ingredients. Mm-hmm. I always try and bring a little bit of stuff from home for familiarity. So some things that will probably people will resonate with people. Mini cheddars. Had a pack of mini cheddars.
The standard or these red Leicester ones?
No, they were standard. They got to be standard, not the red Leicester.
They're so Moorish though. Oh. I'd have run out in the first day.
And but one thing that I wasn't I was advised not to take was chocolate. And the reason for that is it's very, very hot as you row across the Atlantic, particularly as you get closer to the other side, where you're not too far away from the equator. And I was told that chocolate would melt. So I didn't really bring any chocolate, and that was a massive regret of mine, because I'm pretty sure, having been out there, I could have found a way of keeping it cold, and I really crave chocolate.
Even melted chocolate's good, though. You could have had it.
Exactly. But the substitute I had was peanut M&Ms.
Yeah.
And I ate stacks of peanut M&Ms as a day.
Did they melt?
No, they were fine. But I'd done my research, and then there was one other product that I really relied on, which is a product. It's a all-in-one drink, and it's by Ensure NutriVigor, and I'd taken some out with me. I didn't know how it was going to go on the road, but it was brilliant. It was just one of these meal-in-one shakes. And I found, actually, when the going got tough, that was my go-to product. I'm not promoting Ensure NutriVigor in any shape or form. It was, again...
This is not an ad.
But that was a real winner for me out there.
So, out of all the challenges so far, which one was you closest to quitting? And what pushed you to go forward?
It's a really good question. And the reality is, on the last two challenges, it wasn't really an option to quit. And what I mean by that is, if we take the South Pole, the expedition before, I was flown on a tiny plane to the edge of Antarctica, dropped off. And after the first day, I was in a storm for a week. And there's no way that you could mount a rescue. There was no getting out of there. There was no getting picked up. And the conditions for most of that journey, the ground conditions were covered in sastrugi, which is effectively like having an obstacle course on the ground, meaning no plane could land. So with the South Pole, my best option was actually to get to the South Pole. That was, for much of that journey, the safest way I was ever going to get out of that. And it was very much the same with the Atlantic. And because I was rowing from the Canary Islands across to Antigua, and that's on the trade winds route. And what that means is, once you've left Antigua, there's no way you could ever row back to the start line. And once you're realistically you've gone more than 100 miles from Antigua, there's not much chance a boat could come out and rescue you as well. So in essence, once you've gone, you're really committed. You've got two options. One option is to get yourself to the other side, ideally Antigua. But if you miss Antigua, there are other islands that you could row into, or you get rescued. And what rescue means is a large boat, a boat with the capacity to mount a rescue within the vicinity, would need to come and pick me up. And under maritime law, there's a legal obligation that if I'm in trouble, the closest boat needs to come and provide assistance. But what that would mean is two things. Firstly, I'd lose my boat. Not a chance would they tow it. So my boat, all in, there's £100,000 worth of equipment and materials. That's gone. It's not insured. And also in terms of myself, I'd then have no control about my final destination, because that boat is not going to take me where I want to go. I'm going to go to the destination of that boat and get out there. And it could be anywhere in the world. So in some respects, I've been quite fortunate, whereas, yes, I would have liked to have given up. There's no question that the subconscious mind quite often is saying, what are you doing here? Find a way out of it. But on those two expeditions, there really wasn't a get out clause. If you look at Everest, the expedition prior to that, yeah, there were times I could have turned around. The conditions weren't that favourable, but at no point on that climb did I think about turning back, if I'm brutally honest. I was so invested, I was so motivated and committed to getting to the summit. Yeah, wild horses wouldn't have stopped me, to be quite frank.
Because on Everest, the Sherpas do tell you, saying you're not going up, don't they? They can get to a certain point. Is it the Hillary step where they'll say, you're not going any further, you're going back down? Had one of them told you, saying, you can't do this? Because I know you suffered from, is it altitude blindness? Sorry, the term, when you got up there, because you couldn't see at one point, could you?
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of, if we look at Everest in a more traditional way, Usually on Everest, you have a system where Sherpa are guiding the clients up to the top. And there may be some Western guides involved in that mix as well. And in theory, the Sherpa should have the final say on whether a client goes up or goes down. But in practice, and see this quite a lot, the clients themselves may not be fit enough to climb Everest, or they may be fit enough to get to the top. But keeping in mind that the summit of Everest is the halfway, you've still got to get down, and it's a big effort to get down off that mountain. It takes a phenomenal amount of time and energy to get back off. And quite often you see a scenario where the Sherpas, with their experience, recognize that the client is not going to have, or unlikely to be able to make the summit and get back down again. And it might be that they're not going to be able to do it fast enough before they run out of oxygen, or it might be that they're just not going to have the energy, and at some point they're going to end up in a heap on the ground and they're not going to be able to go any further. So the Sherpa may be advising the client to turn around, doing what they can, but you quite often end up with a situation where the client's response is, I've paid you £50,000 for this trip to get me to the summit, you get me to the summit. And I think tragically a lot of a number of the bodies that are up high on that mountain are there for that absolute reason. They didn't take the advice of the Sherpa. In my own instance, I suppose it's a little bit different. I was trying to climb Everest as independently as possible. For a lot of the time on that mountain, I was operating completely solo. And the agreement I had was to make my summit bid, so that's the point from the South Col, the final camp up to the summit, with a wonderful chap called Pemba. And Pemba is a very good friend of mine. We've worked together for the last 10 years. He's already climbed Everest, I think 8 times. He's an 8 times Everest summiteer. But for years I've been saying I wanted to climb the mountain, and we made a little agreement that if he could, he would join me for that final section. When I set off on summit, I did so in some quite challenging conditions, deliberately to avoid what was going to be an inevitable crowded situation the following day. And in fact, there's a very famous photograph taken by Nims Perba, which was taken the day after I made my summit attempt, where you've just got this traffic jam of mountaineers running the entire way from the Hillary Step across the summit ridge right the way through to the summit itself. And I knew that was going to happen, and I made a decision to climb the day before in some challenging weather conditions. Initially, I left my tent, I was completely on my own, but fortunately Pemba, who was dealing with another issue, was able to free himself, catch me up, and then Pemba and I were able to, just the two of us, make our way up to the summit, which was extraordinary to have the whole of Everest to ourselves, but it was also very hard because we had to break trail from that point right the way through to the summit itself. Now, during that night, you were saying about the eye situation. Yeah, the winds were very strong, and there was a lot of what's called rhyming going on. And this is where the water moisture in the air, it starts to congeal, to freeze around equipment, clothing, and also my goggles. And I got to the point where I couldn't see, but because it was night, I decided it was safe to take off my goggles and just climb without them, because I wasn't at that point at risk of what's called snow blindness, which is where the UV rays damage the eyes. What I hadn't budgeted for, though, is that the winds were so strong they were blowing ice crystals into my eyes, and that was scratching the surface of my eyes, which was kind of okay during the night with the head torch. But when I got onto the summit itself, and it was about 5 o'clock in the morning, the sun was just coming up, and for some reason that sunlight had a huge impact, and I couldn't see. I mean, it was like looking through a steamed up window. So yeah, I did find myself on the summit of Everest, technically blind, which was a bit of a challenge.
You got to enjoy the views.
My eyes are actually watering listening to that.
I mean, I can sort of resonate with that story. I did climb Scarfell Pike the other month, got told off by the mountain rescue team for going up in trainers, and when we got to the top, I couldn't see a thing. So I kind of, again, I feel like I'm an explorer already.
Yeah, definitely. You are
I've
the same level as Nick.
I've been on this journey with Nick as well.
Chris, I mean, you've described it identically. It's very much the same. It's getting up there and as I describe it as looking through a steamed up painted window, but it could equally be on the top of Scarfell Pike in the Lake District on a really cloudy, misty day where you can't really see much more than a metre or two ahead of you. Yeah, the view would be very similar.
Have you done Scarfell Pike, Nick?
Yeah, do you know, I've been up that mountain, I reckon I must have done it about 70 times.
I bet that humbles you, Chris, doesn't it?
I've done it twice.
Yeah, Chris does.
Yeah, but I did it in the snow and trainer, so bit of respect, please.
With the North Pole still to complete, it's still a big one. But what so far has been your favourite challenge? What has been the one that you want to tell the story of?
It's such a good question. And to be honest, all the expeditions have a story. If I was to look back, which expedition puts a smile on my face just thinking back to it? The first one has to be Kilimanjaro, where it all started. And that was the start of my journey, as it has been for many, many people. Kilimanjaro, it's a popular mountain. Many of the listeners will have climbed that mountain. But it was one I still have incredibly fond memories of. As a mountain leader today, I've climbed Kilimanjaro, crikey, probably 15 times, guiding clients up there. But to this day, that first summit, that experience on Kilimanjaro was very magical. Other standout expeditions for me really are Denali, which is otherwise known as Mount McKinley, the highest mountain in Northern America, but it resides within Alaska. A mountain that I climbed just with a friend and myself, just a very small team of two. It's a very cold, it's a very technical mountain, and very fond memories of that one. And I have to say, the one that I've just come off, the Atlantic Row, I mean, it pushed me to the limit, but it was also an incredible expedition.
What's it like seeing the coast of Antigua when you've been rowing for so long, and you see that come over the horizon, and you're like, this is it, I've done it?
So you probably want me to say it was the most amazing feeling, land ahoy and everything else.
Before you go there, because I've always thought, because I followed you on the track and I could see you going backwards and forwards, and I get what Sam's asking there, saying you see the thing, but you row backwards, don't you? Or was it forwards? Are you rowing forwards?
No, you're rowing backwards. So in order to see what's going on in front of the boat, you have to come off the oars, stand up, and look ahead. But the truth is, on that final approach into Antigua, it started probably 48, if not 72 hours prior to that, where the ground team, the amazing ground team, had been monitoring the weather, and they'd spotted a window in which I could get into Antigua before the weather changed and the winds would blow me backwards. And what that meant was, if I was going to make it into Antigua, I could do it in 3 days, but I was going to have to row for 3 days without a break. And the option, the choice, was not to do that, but it would have meant that I would have been stuck out at sea potentially for another 10 days, 2 weeks. And in fact, that is what happened. After I arrived in Antigua, other boats that were at that crux decision point were very close to me, didn't come in for another 10 days, and nobody arrived until 10 days after me. So I decided that a big push was an effort worth making. And what that meant is when I got close to Antigua itself, I was pretty exhausted, pretty cooked. And I'd been told in advance, it's amazing, you're going to see the land, and you'll see the land at, I don't know what it was, 15 nautical miles or 20 nautical miles away from Antigua. Well, at 20 miles, I looked out, I couldn't see a damn thing. 15 miles, not a thing. So by the time I finally saw land, it wasn't a case of brilliant, amazing, it's land ahoy. It was more like, oh, thank goodness for that. There you are.
It is there after all.
Exactly. Yeah, and it still seems a really long way away. It still just seemed a really long way away. Yeah. So it wasn't that motivational milestone that perhaps you might think it was.
No, I imagined you'd see it and be like, yes, I've made it. I'm there. And you just row for, another 30 minutes? But no, it's nothing like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, it really was a case of you see land and then you row for another 12 hours.
Does it seem to stay just as far away? It never gets closer as well. I can imagine you're rowing and it's like, it's still so far away.
Oh, completely, yeah. Hardly gets any closer. And then that happened. I first saw it was in the morning time. And then you roll down, and then it gets dark, and you can't see it again. and then in the distance, you start seeing some sort of lights from the land. And actually, that's what I used as a visual aid to actually navigate myself into to where I needed to be.
So you've done the Everest Base Camp on several occasions, helping with the cleanup, but you've witnessed the severity of waste across the globe. Do you think we're doing enough?
No. But I also don't want to be pessimistic about this as well. And I mean, you talk about the waste, the rubbish. I mean, Everest, I climbed Everest as part of an eco team. Collectively, we removed about 5 metric tons from the highest section of the mountains. It was actually beyond base camp where we were working, removing litter. And Everest has got a big reputation of being this rubbish dump. Truth is, that wasn't my experience at all. Yes, there was rubbish, there was litter. Most of it was from expeditions maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, things like old tent poles, things like old cans of food and stuff that they would have used back in the time. Now, in my experience, when you go to the more touristic areas, so whether it's Kilimanjaro, mountains and such, they tend to be pretty tidy, because the reason for that is the local government, they understand how important it is to them, the tourism is to them commercially, and they put measures in place to clear that up. So I don't really see, when you go around the world, it's the explorers, the mountaineers, the adventurers, or the tourists that are responsible for a lot of the waste that you might see. In fact, quite often it's actually the local people, but I don't blame them also, because if you take areas where I've seen a lot of litter, I've organised clear up operations, would be Nepal. But this is people in Nepal that don't understand that plastics don't biodegrade. Until 20, 30 years ago, they would be eating off plant leaves and what have you. And as a Western world, we've introduced all these products that don't degrade. And yeah, they're sticking with tradition. They finish their meal, they throw their leaf on the floor. It's the same with a polystyrene container or whatever it is. And that's becoming a real big issue. But in terms of the rubbish itself, I mean, I think that the bigger issue is the climate change that I'm seeing. And what you find with climate change is, yeah, sure, I mean, we live in the UK. We're now starting to see the impact with these incredibly hot summers. We've just had one of the wettest winters in history. We've got a lot of flooding now. And we can see that it's changing. I mean, you'd have to be pretty unaware to recognise something's going on. But then when you go into the more extreme environments, so if we were to take the North Pole or the South Pole, the temperature rise that we've experienced here in the UK, you can multiply that by a factor of 3 to 5. So what we're seeing is much more amplified warming and much more amplified effect of warming. And if we use the North Pole as an example, in the last 30 years, 90% of what's called the multi-season summer sea ice, so this is where ice, seawater is frozen over years, 90% of that has gone. I mean, that's incredible, in 30 years. And people often argue, yeah, the climate's changing, it's normal. I say, yeah, it's normal for the climate to change, but it's not normal for the climate to change that much in such a short period of time. And not unless we've been hit by a meteor or there's been some catastrophic event. We are in very much new territory. Other areas where we can see the impact is closer to home is the Alps, the European Alps. And in fact, I think it was 2020, in 1 year, the scientists discovered that we lost 9% of the glacial ice in the Alps in a 12-month period. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a lot, is that, isn't it?
And that won't come back. That's not coming back. So yeah, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but I do want to be able to bring back an authentic, honest message that, in the Greater Mountain Ranges, in the more extreme parts of the world, flipping heck, they are changing so fast, and that change is going to be coming to us. It's going to be impacting us either directly or indirectly. To give an example of the North Pole, that loss of ice, that loss of summer sea ice is so dramatic, and the scientists now believe by 2040, which is an incredible thing, 16 years away, in summer, we are going to have no ice remaining in the Arctic. So if we think we were brought up looking at a globe and it's got the big white bit at the top and the big white bit at the bottom, well, we can scrub off the white bit at the top. And I mean, do we need a more stark example of climate change? I hear a lot of people, it doesn't matter, it's climate change. Like, come on, wake up, look at it. This is really dramatic. And one of the reasons it's dramatic is because that ice is the best reflector of the sun's energy we have. And once that ice is gone, then the heat of the sun gets absorbed into the ocean beneath the ice. And of course, that then contributes to climate change and global warming.
What would you say to people that continue to deny it?
Wake up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say to them, look out the window, get your head out the echo chamber that you're existing in, and also just take a moment to scrutinise the person who is telling you that it's not happening. There is, if we look within the scientific community, there is a minute, and I mean minute, proportion of society, of scientists that are openly stating climate change is a hoax. And they'll refer back to some historic data which related to an El Nino year, where they can show a graph and they can play with statistics and say, here's the story, it doesn't exist. It's garbage. 98, I would argue 98+% of the scientific community all agree universally that not just is climate change happening, but it's happening at an accelerated rate, and it will have a catastrophic effect on planet Earth, the environment, which in turn is going to have knock-on effects to how we live, to nature, and what have you. But what I would say is look outside. Look outside, and if we think back to, what was it, last year, the year before, we had a summer that was nearly 40 degrees in the UK. I mean, 40 degrees. When I was being brought up, 25 degrees was a hot day. 40 degrees was Sahara desert temperatures. I would say look at actually what's happening in terms of the world as a consequence of climate change. And what I mean by that is there's now areas that cannot be habited because the conditions are too severe, there's no water available. Look at the movement, the migration of people that is now occurring due to climate change. I mean, you cannot deny it. And there are examples all over the world of the impact that climate change is happening. If we take, for example, the Maldives, that well-known holiday destination, well, the sea levels are rising, and it's not going to be that long in kind of geographical terms before it's underwater, before those lovely places where people were actually able to enjoy their holidays, they're gone. So yeah, it's happening, you've just got to look for it. But what you've also got to do is you've got to scrutinise the information you're getting from a very, very small, select, and in many cases from people that have no knowledge, no scientific knowledge whatsoever, and also look a little bit deeper than that as to what is their ulterior motive for giving that message as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it firsthand, haven't you, Nick?
Yeah, you can't deny it. You just cannot deny it. And again, you know, talking about the North Pole, this expedition is not going to be a big expedition. And the reason for that is there's not enough ice to do it. Had that been 30 years ago, I'd have been able to make a journey from, whether it was Canada, whether it was Siberia, whether it was Iceland, all the way through to the pole. Right now, not a chance. When I looked into that, the reality is I'd need a boat, not a set of skis and a sled in order to make it. It's happening. It's happening everywhere. It's happening at home, but we're seeing it more in the more extreme environments. But you're not going to convince me it's not happening. And also, you're not going to convince me that it's a natural phenomena. It's a natural phenomenon for climate change. It's not a natural phenomena for climate to change this quickly. And the point at which the claim started was the global industrial revolution of the world. The point where we started using fossil fuels at an alarming rate and pushing back out into the atmosphere carbon dioxide and other gases that are detrimental to other greenhouse gases that have a detrimental impact on our climate.
But obviously, we at ACS try and promote sort of sustainability and environmentally friendly products. What would you say to, what do you think businesses can do to help? Obviously, it's small things. I mean, we at home, we recycle quite a lot. What would you say is what businesses can start to do if they haven't started already, or what they can do now to help them just make that small change towards an environmentally friendly sort of business?
Yeah. So my first recommendation, suggestion is come at this from a place of optimism, not I have to do it because blah, blah, blah. Because I think ultimately it's good business. The other thing that I would recommend is start small and build. rather than overnight decide that we are going to be we're going to become this eco warrior, we're going to change everything. Just like all things, just start small and build and look for the low-hanging fruit. So what that means is just being able to take a moment, just sit back and look at the organisation itself. What are you doing? What impact are you having? What are the big things? What are the big things that are impacting the environment? And that's, you're going to be looking at things like your energy consumption, about the travel involved, what travel is involved with the business itself. You're going to be looking at the impact of the staff themselves. Are you supporting them to become more environmentally active within their own lifestyles? So there's a whole raft of things that you can look at within the organisation and then say, okay, what's the easiest thing to change? What can I change that's going to have most effect for least cost and least human impact? Because we can be quite lazy. And then from there, just start to grow it and expand it. And ACS themselves, I think, are a real example, a stellar example of what can be done. And the initiatives that I've seen across ACS, that's the solar panels across the roof, a very high proportions, I understand, of ACS's electricity consumption right now comes from renewables, comes from the roof above the building, the all-electric car fleet across ACS. And then starting to get a little bit more creative, innovative. So I understand now that you deliver in towns where possible using e-bikes. Mm-hmm. And these are really, really smart initiatives. And I think once you get that snowball rolling, it's very easy then to start building and just adding this onto it. Okay, how much do I need to travel? Can I cut that down a little bit? What about my diet? I mean, big things that would make an impact would be to consume less animal-based products. And I know that's not popular, and I'm not saying for a moment everybody goes what they call vegan. I don't even like the word vegan. But actually, if you were to look at your diet, you could probably cut back a little bit, cut out some of the junk, go for quality over quantity, and that would have a really profound impact, not just on the environment, but also on you and your health as well. So there's a whole raft of things that we can be doing, and I think it's just a case of personal audit, organisational audit, look for the low-hanging fruit, and then we've got to start changing our habits and behaviours, because I think a lot of the resistance to change is that we've been doing the same thing for so long. And what really encourages me these days is I spend a lot of time working with schools, with school children. And they've got a completely different mindset. They operate from a completely different state of consciousness. Not only do they understand that there is a problem, yeah, they recognize it, but they're also highly motivated to do something about it. And it's this next generation. They're already changing. They're making demands of their parents, of their teachers, of their wider communities. And that's amazing to see that, because it's not going to be long before this generation grow up. They're going to be working in the jobs, in the offices, and ultimately they're going to be making big impactful decisions. And that's good to see, because they really are, they as I say, they have a very different mindset, and I'm very excited when I talk to them, and I'm looking forward to that generation coming through and making an impact, because the truth is, our generation, and I include myself, I've driven company cars, I've flown all over the world, but my generation, we've got a lot to answer for, and I think history is going to be looking at us and saying, you knew. Because the truth is, we've known for the last 20, 30 years that this problem's coming, yet we've been unwilling, we've been so, quite frankly, we've been so selfish, and I include myself in this, to make the changes that we know that we needed to do. And what we've done is we've taken a problem and said, no, I'm not going to impact my lifestyle, my quality of living, and we've just handed all of that to the next generation. But it would have been so much easier had we acted early. What we've done now is we've allowed the problem to get so big that whoever is picking up that problem is going to deal with it has got a problem with a magnitude that I don't think we've seen before in human history.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I think we're going to move on to some quick fire questions now.
We're going to bring you back on when you've done the North Pole, so we can ask you a few more questions after you've done that. So yeah, we have a few quick fire questions from a few of our listeners. Some odd questions, some interesting questions. So first of all, quickly, which was your favourite mountain to climb?
Denali.
Denali.
The most influential person you've met?
Can I say two?
Go on then.
Go for it.
Okay. In terms of in the wider world, the community, Sir David Attenborough, without a shadow of a doubt. The man has played a huge role, influence in my own life, but I've also been able to see that he has this amazing ability of connecting with people of all ages, all backgrounds, and particularly the younger generation I was referring to just a moment ago. So yeah, I mean, just an extraordinary human being, and I can't think of anybody else that's had such an impact in terms of protecting the natural world, planet Earth, and the race against climate change. On a personal level, I'd have to say a chap called Twid Turner, who nobody likely will have heard of. But in the mountaineering world, he's an absolute legend of a human being. And he was, I met Twid right at the start of my mountaineering journey. He's a mountain guide, international mountain guide, and he showed me the ropes. He spent a lot of time with me. He taught me to climb. We spent time out in South America in the European Alps. He took me through a number of the qualifications I have today. And under his mentorship, he did a number of things. He taught me about ethics of mountaineering. He taught me about hard work, no shortcuts to the top. He taught me about the importance of being on time, organised, prepared. At no point on an expedition do you lay back. You work the entire time. And it was just this extraordinary mentorship. And what he was able to do is not just keep me safe, keep me alive during that phase of my development where, had Twid not been around, I'm not sure I would be here today to be able to share the story, because he allowed me to make mistakes in a safe environment and stop me from making the big ones. So yeah, I'd have to give that call out to Twid. But as I said, he's not known, but he is one of the best mountaineers in the world. His legacy, his climbing history is just extraordinary. And I see that a lot actually in the world, because yeah, I dabble in mountaineering, climbing and these sports, and I suppose to a degree I've got a little bit of a profile now. But the truth is there are people out there in my world, in the mountaineering world, that are operating at a level that is so high. It's just remarkable. But because they're not climbing mountains like Everest and these well-known things, they get no coverage. But it doesn't mean they're not there. And as I said, in terms of myself, without Twid, I wouldn't be here today.
Amazing. What's next once the 721 challenge is completed? Because there's not really much left to do.
It's quite an interesting one. Yeah, people are saying now in the world of exploration, you know, what's next? You've got the oceans to explore. But I don't know. I would try and reframe that, because I think for anybody looking to make their mark in human history, there's never been such an exciting time. And if we link that back to climate change, the problems that the world is facing right now, I don't think there's ever been such a great threat to humans' existence. You know, we're facing more threat than we ever have in history. So now is the time for people to step up. There are some huge problems out there that need solving, and we need people to step up and solve those problems. And I think when we look back to some of the most prestigious awards on the planet, the Nobel Peace Prize, it won't be long before the people that are winning these awards are people that are actually been able to think outside of the box, come to the table with solutions to the problems which right now we don't seem to be able to do. I mean, the only person out there that perhaps you could put forward would be Elon Musk, with obviously the impact he's had on the EV market, the switch to renewables, etc. I'm not saying as a person I particularly like, respect or admire, but we can't deny the effect that he's had out there.
So on the row, did you cry at any point?
No, I didn't, and I wish I had. And there's a number of expeditions where it's all got so much that emotional build up, and for whatever reason, I don't seem to be able to cry. And I don't mean that in the sense of, you know, I'm not a crybaby, because there's times when I really wish I could, where I could release that emotion. But no, I've never cried on an expedition.
I'd have cried. I think everyone knows I'd have cried.
Normally, but that said, what I tend to do is I have to release and vent in other ways. So yeah, if you'd have heard some of the language, some of the obscenities that were coming from me, particularly when I was trying to get my boat to go in a straight line in a storm at 2:00 in the morning, completely sleep deprived, having gone around in a circle about 20 times and getting more and more fatigued. I guess the expletives that are flying out at the top of my voice are my substitute for crying. I've got to practice my crying.
I want to say this next question was brought in by our listeners or someone else. No, I wanted to ask this one.
I've just read it.
Sorry, Nick.
Pooping at sea, is it as easy as it sounds?
So what you do... It's a great question. It's one that the school kids all want to know about. How do you go to the toilet?
I'm a school kid.
Yeah. So you've got a bucket, a designated bucket. And actually you put a bit of water in the bucket and off you go, and then throw the bucket over the side and a good rinse out. So on a good day, where the conditions are fine, not an issue at all. Not an issue. I mean, it's a loo with a view, right? One of the best views you could ever have. However, on the flip side, it might be 4:00 in the morning. It's dark outside. The conditions are utterly horrendous. There's water waves smashing over the side of the boat. You're exhausted, but you've got to go, which means you have to go out on that deck. And then it's not as straightforward. And it's just, somehow you've got to kind of, get through that. And get back in the cabin. It's always a relief to have done that. So generally not a problem in tough conditions. It can be challenging.
What and who? I can't.
You're all right, Ebony.
I can't read that.
They're just words.
The pooping's thrown me off.
What/who?
What/who did you miss the most whilst out on the Atlantic?
Okay, in terms of who, there's only one answer, and that's
Tinker.
I
knew it was coming.
So Tinker's my border collie, who comes with me normally everywhere. He spent a lot of time on the rowing boat. We rowed around the Isle of Wight together. He's my double act. He's with me literally. I wouldn't have brought him today. He's been in the office, as you know. With me.
Slower than Frosty, isn't it?
He was. They had a race with the office dog, Frosty. I think it was just being kind. And he's the most amazing, gorgeous, good-natured monkey that you could. He's a dog, not a monkey, but I call him a cheeky monkey. And I thought of him every single day, and I was lucky. My parents were looking after him, and they were able to send me some little video updates on WhatsApp I was able to download, and that was really, really kept me going out there. In terms of if there was any specific thing, towards the end you were talking about food. My food was getting really dull. I hadn't put enough time into it, not enough variety. So towards the end I was starting to crave things that you probably wouldn't think. I'm normally quite healthy, but I was craving McDonald's, I was craving Coke. And when you're in a sort of state of starvation, a lot of the marketing from these unhealthy companies, boy does it work. That's the stuff that I tend to crave.
Fantastic. And then one final question. You've got one question to ask Sir David Attenborough. What is it?
I mean, the first thing I'd want to say to Sir Dave is thank you. Just thank you. In terms of a question, my goodness, I would ask him if I was able to give him the opportunity to share my current situation and position, I would ask him what he would recommend that I do to have the greatest impact on our planet to ensure that it's protected for future generations to come.
Question.
That's a fantastic question.
That's a really good question.
And I wish he was here to answer it. Unfortunately, the budget is not there.
If next time you see him, it's the second question you ask is, can you go on the SES podcast? Unfortunately, that is all we have time for this week. We do have to let you get off and train for the North Pole. Thank you very much, Nick, for coming in. We really appreciate your time.
You.
And we wish you all the best on your expedition to the North Pole as well.
Well, firstly, can I borrow your big coat? Thank you so much. It's been such an honour, and always anything with ACS, the ACS team, to be involved is just a pleasure. And of course, I'll be back. I'd be delighted to come back and share the North Pole.
You're very inspirational, Nick. I've got to say. Thank you.
And likewise, thanks again.
Cheers, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you very much.